Welcome to the North Texas Vetting Committee for the Railroad Commission. We have with us today Warren Chisum. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to read the rules out loud. No one is allowed to be in the room except the vetting panel, North Texas Council vetting camera operators, and the candidate. All electronics allowed in the room shall be turned off except laptops used by the vetting committee and the video recorders provided by the vetting committee. No written materials or notes will be taken by the candidate. North Texas Council vetting panel members and candidate agree that all questions and responses at this vetting session are to remain confidential property until videos are uploaded and considered public information for the North Texas Council website. Verbal questions will be asked and verbal responses to those questions will be given with 2-minute responses for each question. 2 to 5. Okay. There will not be any follow-up questions or explanations of the questions given during the video session. You may, however, request for a repeat of a question at the time the question was first asked during this video session. We will now introduce the vetting committee members. I'm Gordon Edwards from Ovilla, Texas.
Liz Moser, Garland, Texas.
I'm Barbara Harless from Murphy, Texas.
Bob Morrison, Dallas.
And Brad White, Midlothian, Texas.
Again, Warren Chisum is with us today. Please start us off with a 2-minute introduction of yourself and why you are running.
I'm Warren Chisum, and I'm a state representative, have been a state representative from the Texas Panhandle, primarily outside of Amarillo. My hometown is Pampa, Texas, where I've lived all my life, so haven't been very far away from there. I've served 22 years in the House of Representatives, having been elected in 1989, and served continuously and presently the representative from District 88. I have spent 35 years in the oil and gas business, having begun my career in the oil and gas business as a roughneck, and worked my way all the way through to being the owner of the company and producing my own oil and gas, meeting payroll of as many as 300 employees at one time, and providing for my family, which is my wife, and I have 2 children. We've been married for 54 years. So I have always been a conservative, although I was not always a Democrat. When I first ran, I was not always a Republican. When I first ran, I ran as a Democrat, and I have to confess that Ann Richards switched me to being a Republican. So I became a Republican during the Bush administration, and have been in the Republican Party ever since. I also have served as a chair of the Environmental Regulation Committee, which for 10 years, and they oversee air quality in the state of Texas, and among other things. In 2007, I served as the Appropriations Chair, the Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives, at which time we divided up the money between all of the state agencies, and so that's my experience. I am running for the Railroad Commission for the express purpose of bringing this commission back to its original state, which was a very well-recognized state agency.
We're now going to start the questions. You'll have 3 minutes to answer each question until the final question of 5 minutes. First question. What is a railroad commissioner and what duties do they have?
The Railroad Commissioner is the primary regulatory body for the Texas Oil and Gas Association, or oil and gas business in the state of Texas. Likewise, they regulate surface mining, which does not necessarily mean oil and gas. It could well mean coal or uranium mining, which is a pretty large activity in the state of Texas. They also regulate compressed gases and propane. So when it comes to propane, they set the regulations about the safety regulations primarily, but how you handle propane and who's licensed to sell propane and at what capacity. In addition to that, they have hearings about natural gas distribution companies in cities and rule on the rates of the cities. So that's the four main functions of the Texas Railroad Commission. And primarily most of that is spent on the regulation of the oil and gas industry, the drilling, production, and the safety of pipelines. And so, but we do not go inside the plants. We do not regulate inside the plants. We have nothing to do with the gasoline product after it comes out of the plants. That's either handled by by some other agency than the Railroad Commission. But all pipelines, all oil and gas production regulated by the Railroad Commission.
Thank you. Question number 2. How does the Railroad Commission keep Texas Energy independent from the rest of U.S. and Mexico?
Well, it's primarily regulated by us, so we keep it inside the state of Texas, and we're not governed by any other state, Mexico or any other state that joins us. Even though we do have some common areas when we're drilling on the Red River, which is close to Oklahoma, and we have agreements with Oklahoma about how close to the line we'll drill and those sort of things. Mexico falls under completely different things, but there's precious little oil and gas drilling next to the border of Mexico, but we have international agreements that are done by the feds, and we comply with those with Mexico. But we have nothing to do with the regulations in Oklahoma, New Mexico, or Mexico.
How does deregulation affect Texas Energy?
Deregulation of what?
I'm only allowed to read the question.
Well, the oil and gas has always been regulated about where you can drill and where you don't have to drill. We have never been regulated except for the fact when in the early 60s through the early 80s we had the regulations of how much you could produce. And so the reason oil and gas, or the Texas Railroad Commission, was created was to regulate prices. And we regulate prices by regulating the market of how much is out there for sale. And but for the last 20 years we have had precious little regulation of gas production. But we have the authority to go in and regulate gas production to keep the price at a reasonable price.
Mr. Chisum, please be patient for a little background for this next question. Per Wall Street Journal and CBC News, PetroChina has purchased 100% ownership of the Alberta, Canada Athabasca oil sands by first purchasing 60% in 2010, then purchasing the remaining 40% in 2012 for an estimated $2.5 billion. Also, CBS News goes on to state that PetroChina is following a Chinese trend that is acquiring raw materials such as oil for its rapidly growing economy. Per Pipeline and Gas Journal, Keystone Pipeline is solely owned by TransCanada, a Canadian energy company, and plans to build an extension of the Keystone Pipeline called Keystone XL from Alberta, Western Canada to the delivery point terminals in Port Arthur, Texas in 2012. Are you in favor of taking Texas citizens' private property for the development of Keystone Pipeline, owned by TransCanada, a Canadian company, and to transport Chinese oil to Port Arthur, Texas, and for gain of China's growing economy and interest?
Well, that's a fair question, and the fact of the matter is we have been using Canadian oil in the state of Texas and in the United States for many, many years. So the fact that we have pipelines, and pipelines have eminent domain power when they're allowed to be built, I am in favor of having pipelines because we have to bring the oil to the United States and to Texas to refine it. So if your question is, am I in favor of bringing the Keystone Pipeline to Port Arthur, Texas, the answer is absolutely. I'm in favor of that. And the only way you can do that is have the law of eminent domain. Senate Bill 18, passed session before last, stated that in Texas there would be fair treatment of private landowners for pipelines who had to cross them. And we had broad agreement on that from the governor's office as well as the House and the Senate. Texas Farm Bureau endorsed the bill. We're very aware of private property rights and fair treatment of private property rights. Senate Bill 18 took care of that, and regardless of where it's TransCanada or anybody else, if you're putting a pipeline in, you will treat the landowners fairly.
Okay, thank you.
Next question 5 is, right now Texas law allows oil and gas companies to put a pipeline under a citizen's private property to get to another property that is drilling and or moving oil to transfer stations. What are your thoughts on this, and why aren't private property rights being protected?
Well, they are protected, but eminent domain and the mere business of pipeline requires that it have the ability to transport, just like we do with electricity or automobiles or anything else that has to be transported from the production point to the market point. And to not let that happen would be the end of oil and gas as we know it. It has always been that way, and it always has been. Again, Senate Bill 18, passed in the 80th session, addressed all of those issues, and we had broad agreement on it. Now, obviously, not everyone agrees with it, but most laws not everybody agrees with. But the mere fact that if you're going to drill oil and gas, you have to have a transportation method to get it there, either through trucks or pipeline. And when you're talking about large volumes of oil, as well as natural gas, pipeline is the only safe way to consistently move large volumes of oil and natural gas.
Thank you. Number 6, what role, if any, does the Bible study have in your life, and will it affect your decisions as commissioner?
Well, the Bible has a lot to do in my life and my study. I am a Christian, have always been a Christian, and would stay a Christian. So, how does it affect you? Like it does anybody else. It causes you to want to treat people fairly. It causes you to respect others, and the effect of how it affects this job is just like any job I've ever had, and most of my jobs have always been in the oil and gas business, and that's a good place for Christians to work.
Thank you. What are the positives and negatives of wind energy for Texans?
Well, the positives are that it has a very low fuel cost. And when you have large amounts of wind, and if you look at the biggest cost in the long term of a coal-fired plant or a gas-fired plant or any other plant, fuel cost is the biggest issue. So even though you have to put money in transmission lines, and you have to spend a lot of money building a wind tower and a windmill to turn it, the low fuel cost makes wind somewhat competitive in today's market. But it's one of the only kinds of fuel out there that has an absolute zero cost. And so gathering that zero cost allows us to have a a supply of energy that we don't have to worry about the ups and downs of how much the transportation or anything gets to it. So it is very essential, I think, that you have all kinds of energy. However, it has a very poor reliability. And when you're producing electricity and using electricity, reliability of the electric market is primary. And while I think you are to have wind energy, and we already invest money in wind energy, we need to understand that it cannot be the sole source. Because if it's a sole source, we'll find ourselves in the dark a whole lot.
Thank you. This is question number, what question?
8.
Okay, what role does green energy play, if any, in the oil and gas industry?
Well, it's very similar to the last question. Green energy is wind. Green energy is any kind of renewable energy that you have. Water is the original green energy. Wind is the one we operate with right now, and Texas, by the way, leads the rest of the states in the amount of wind energy we have, which is almost 5,000 kilowatts of electricity. So I think green energy is good. I think we are to have that kind of energy. We just need to understand that it is not a reliable source except for the green energy that we get from water. And so like I previously stated, reliability is the main issue when you're talking about whether or not your energy source is good for business and good for people that live here. So while solar and wind and water are all great energies to have, it cannot be the sole source.
Thank you. Do you have any invested interest in Texas energy sources, including oil and gas? If yes, how do you keep that from being a conflict of interest?
Well, I've served 22 years in the legislature, and in the legislature we would have to, if we had a conflict of interest, we had to state it, and we always have had to state it. A conflict of interest just means that you have something that affects your property without affecting other people's property. As long as the regulations that we had were broad and affected all producers in that same class, it is not a conflict of interest to own oil and gas. The first part of your question, do I own oil and gas interests? I do. Do I own royalty interests? The answer is yes. And I have for many, many years, and if I had a situation which affected only my personal investment in oil and gas, then I would recuse myself from making a decision on it. I have studied this with and I have written opinions from legislative or from the proper lawyers that says that you can own your oil and gas and still be a legitimate regulator in the state of Texas.
Okay, thank you. Question number 10. What are you going to do as a railroad commissioner to keep the Railroad Commission accountable to the people and as an elected seat?
Well, the way you keep it accountable to the people is you treat the people who are in the business and people who use energy, you treat them fairly. And I would be absolutely very fair about how I treated people who were property owners as well as oil and gas producers. And sometimes you have to make decisions, and not everybody agree with those, but it's just essential that we have a regulatory body to oversee oil and gas. It's essential that we have production of oil and gas if we're going to have oil and gas business in this country, and certainly we all like the things that are brought by the oil and gas energy industry, and I intend to make it even better and even more responsive to the people, because I have dealt with it on both sides of the fence. I have land and I have pipelines that cross my land. I have royalty interest, and I have to deal with the people that produce my minerals and get my payment for them. I have spent a lot of time in all phases of this business, from the drilling and production, from the ownership of mineral interest, from the ownership of land that didn't have mineral interest. I've been on all sides of that issue.
All right, question 11. Please give 2 examples of how the smart grid, like smart meters for electric industry, could benefit the oil and gas industry.
Well, the smart grid is electric grid in this state. That's what the grid you're talking about. And the oil and gas industry has absolutely, or the Railroad Commission has no regulatory authority over smart grid. We did smart grid when Energy Future Holdings bought out TXU here in this area in Texas. One of the provisions that we had when we allowed that deal to go forward was that the survivor would put in smart meters on our electric grid. And the reason you do that is because eventually you can reduce the cost and the need for more generation if you have a smart grid. And we have pushed for it for a long time in the state of Texas. We now have smart meters in a lot of the ERCOT area. We don't have it in that much of it in the other parts of the area of the state of Texas. But if we're not going to build excessive generation plants, then we have to have a way to manage the grid. And smart meters are purely a way to manage the grid. That's the only purpose of them. They can reduce the cost of management by electronic reading of the meter so that you can bill it out properly, and that's the only reason for the smart grid. Texas is not finished with that yet. It's going to go forward.
Okay, thank you. Question number 12. In your opinion, was it a mistake of the PUC or the Public Utilities Commission to make smart meters mandatory? Would
It
you
wasn't
please
them that
explain?
did it. It was the Texas legislature that did that. So the Public Utility Commission just carried out the rules of the Texas Railroad Commission. Where it was smart or not, we'll see in the future. We know that we either have to build more generation of electricity in the state of Texas to keep the ERCOT online, or have a better way of managing it. So it is purely smart meters, or purely a management tool of the Public Utility Commission, and the Texas legislature is the one that said to spend money on making that work.
Thank you. Question number 13. Is the Railroad Commission a full-time job? What is the pay and the retirement plan?
It is a full-time job. It pays more than $100,000 a year. I'm not exactly sure, I haven't checked into what that is, but it is a full-time job. Requires you to live in Travis County, and the retirement plan is a state elected retirement plan, just like all other state retirement plans in state government. So it's an elected state employee.
Thank you. This is your last question. You will have 5 minutes to answer this question. Would you like to take this time to correct any accusations pointed toward you or your campaign, or point out differences between you and your opponent?
Well, that's fair, because I think the people of Texas need to know who they're hiring for the job. I've repeatedly asked my opponent to come up with a resume. I didn't start that. During the primary, Roland Sledge, who was one of the candidates from Houston, he asked that we all submit a resume. And we all submitted one except for my opponent. And she responded this last week to the fact that the reason I had more experience than her is the fact that I had lived longer than she had. Well, that's not necessarily true. I probably had more experience at the age of 40 than I have now. So my experience in the oil and gas business is very broad. It is a lifetime of getting there. I did not go to college. I went directly to the oil and gas fields in 1957. I've been there ever since I started in this business. My experience is vast, and all the time I've been in the oil and gas business, I've been regulated by the Railroad Commission. So I've seen it change over the years, and I've seen it being a jumping off place for many, many candidates wanting to run for higher office. I want to get the Railroad Commission back on track, being a world-class regulatory body that regulates 25% of the economy of this state. It is essential to the state of Texas if we are going to do good and if we're going to lead the rest of this nation and the world. We need to do that through the oil and gas business, because energy is the reason we're different than any other country. We know how to use energy. We use it to produce other things in this state, and without it, Texas would not be what it is today. So that's it. I want to be the railroad commissioner, not so I can go run for the next higher office on the tree. I am happy being the railroad commissioner, and it will pay enough, even though I don't know how much it pays.